Welcome to Prose and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Welcome to Prose and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast, the podcast by emerging writers for emerging writers, because sometimes we feel like prose, sometimes we feel like cons. I'm Paddy Boylan. I'm hosting again today, and joining me this week, Alex Eldridge.
Hi, guys.
And calling in from the Green Isles for the first time is James Healy.
Hello.
James, you've just moved back to Ireland, is that correct?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it was my first podcast back since the move.
Yeah, making you nostalgic.
It's funny. I thought it would be really surreal coming back after 4 years, but it's actually I've just fallen right back in. Yeah, it feels fun.
Yeah, I guess it happens when you live in a place for 20 years.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to look at something that is, I think, quite often overlooked in writing practices. It's not something I would have considered before I started writing, but it's absolutely essential to mental health, to productivity, and to the writing of your stories in general. That's taking a break. The value of taking a break from writing, and I guess to any creative project, giving it time to ruminate and coming back a while later. It's often said that while you're not working on something directly, things happen in the mind anyway. The wheels turn even when you're not aware of them. I mean, how many times have you gone to sleep, then woken up with the answer to a problem freshly in your head? Or gone for a walk, taken a shower, and when you're not even thinking about it, bam, the idea to whatever problem you have just sort of materializes. Before we get into this, let's go around and see what you guys have been writing or watching or doing or having done to you. James, what's on the brain menu? That's a weird way of putting that.
The brain menu, okay.
Yeah, sometimes words get said.
Yeah. After a 26-hour flight, I've watched an awful lot of films and an awful lot of TV series.
Did you cry in any of the films? I hear that on planes there's something about the air pressure that makes the eyes want to cry.
Your eyes will definitely water, and you might be like blasted by aircon.
Maybe that's it.
But no, there was no emotional tears. I think it was just exhaustion, weeping.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, not to get into the full list, but I think the standout was probably Fleabag, which is a TV series written by, if I can get her name, yes, Olivia Colman, I believe, who starred in it alongside a few other people, which is very good. It was just a TV show about a woman living in Britain and her dating habits and her kind of life at the moment and stuff when she runs into the cafe. Very, very funny, very, very sharp, very, very witty. They did 2 seasons. I think they might have finished it after 2 seasons because I don't think there's been a third season for a while. The story kind of feels like it's come to an arc by that point. Very, very good. I'd recommend it to anyone, really, for me.
It sounds very gritty, which, I mean, yeah, that's true to form for British TV, right? It's
gritty.
Always very gritty.
Did I say anything about gritty?
No, but it's called Fleabag, and it's British.
Fleabag,
so
yeah.
Assuming, I mean,
I think it's because she's a bit of a hot mess.
Yeah, that comes across in the name. It's very aptly named.
Go.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. That's me.
Alex, what have you been up to? What's going in the brain?
Yeah, I've actually been reading a biography of Warren Buffett, of all people, and
okay, interesting.
Every now and then I just get on this trip where I just want to read about like the Murdochs or the Packers or anything. So at some point I've been listening to a guy who's like very into him, and I'm like, I guess I'll check it out. I actually started reading it years ago and remember being like, this is really good, then lost the book on a bus, and then ever since I've been like, I should keep reading that book. But it's very engaging, very engrossing. There's something about biographies that I find very, very engaging. Like I never feel exhausted by them because it's always something new is happening and something is legitimately happening. Like ironically, you'd think someone's life is just kind of like, not a lot happens, but there's always this new focus on whatever's happening. So I don't know. I find them, if they're done well, they're narratively very engaging. So yeah, that's mainly what I've been doing. Watching a bit of Succession as well, which is great. It just sort of ties into that. I know you don't really like it much.
No, I don't.
What
Although I feel
What's
like
that?
jumping on like on the fourth season was a bit rough.
At Succession, I just find the dialogue is all like, F that mother effer right in his effing F hole. What the F? We need to F. And just everyone speak. And it doesn't matter. I'll get off my soapbox. You're going to get to the last chapter of that Warren Buffett book, and he's like giving his tips for success. And one of them is going to be, don't leave books on buses.
Yeah, yeah, apparently so. I'm like, that's what I was missing.
That's what I'm missing.
Yeah, it's a big book too. It's like it's a tome.
Never read a biography in my life, and maybe that's why I am where I am. I am reading Save the Cat Writes a Novel, which is very good. It's a novel it's a book on how to write a novel, structure, how to approach it, stuff like that, which I really need because I've been struggling with my current book. And I'm not reading any fiction, but I have ordered a stack of books, including James' Imperium by Robert Harris.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Imperium? Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
I was thinking Hyperion.
Also good.
Imperium is also amazing. I love that. I was just talking about it the other day. One of my favorite series.
Yeah, I remember you were telling me how good it was. I wrote it on my to read list, and hey, I'm actually getting around to it. So yeah, I'll let you know when I begin that.
I think you're gonna really like it.
I think so. Yeah. Robert Harris is a historical fiction writer, and this is about, I think, some period in the Roman Empire. Is that right, James?
It is, if anyone is familiar with the Rome, it is kind of follows Cicero's life, I guess. And he was in power and in politics shortly before Julius Caesar, who everyone kind of recognizes. But Julius Caesar kind of caused the end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. So it's kind of the transition as it became one into the other. So Cicero's life kind of documents this change because it occurred around at the same time that I think paper or writing became massively available. And I know that his clerk or his slave basically was someone who wrote an awful lot, and he invented some kind of shorthand. So he made notes all of the time. So there's so much information around this period of time because there's so much information about Cicero, I believe, because his clerk made all these shorthand notes. And later on in his life, he wrote the story of Cicero's life and stuff. So we have a tremendous amount of information about that point in history, whereas we have nothing before then, simply because there wasn't access to paper, access to writing and stuff like that.
I wonder sometimes when early writers like that, if they're ever aware of how they're immortalizing themselves and their period, like how important if they knew it was important to later generations that they were writing this stuff down and no one else was.
Yeah. Well, I think he must have, because it was a very big, even if you just lived imagine if you lived kind of between World War I and World War II, you would kind of say like things are different now on the far side of this big event. So I think they knew in Rome that things had changed as it went from one into the next. And they didn't know if things would go back or what would be the future of Rome from that point. They couldn't have known it would have continued on for, I don't actually know how long. It was easily enough 1,000 years. I'm actually reading Edge of War by Robert Harris myself.
That's also on the list, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, that's very good. They turned it into a Netflix series or a Netflix film. And the Netflix film is very, very good and very, very close to the book, because I think Robert Harris was actually the producer on it. So that's like a great film. If you like history, if you kind of spy, international espionage kind of stuff, yeah, you'd really like that. The book is good as well. It goes into a little bit more into the politics and into the delicate position that they're in at the time.
Nice.
But the film is a fantastic adaptation of the book.
Yeah, Robert Harris, really talented writer, and looking forward to reading more of his stuff. Yeah, so, taking a break, and this is something that we've all spoken about in our individual conversations, and we've mentioned many times on the podcast before. We wrote it down as an episode idea because at one episode we thought, yeah, we should do an episode on this. And here we are. I mean, to kick things off, James, we were talking just before this episode about how you have 3 long-form stories, I'm going to say novels, that you're writing at the moment. Is that right?
Yes. I think to say that I'm writing them all at the moment might be a bit self-aggrandizing because I'm working on one of them and I'm really keen to start working on the next one. And then as soon as I worked on that for a bit, I want to work on the next one again. So I just have 3 of them that they're on the go. They're in the back of my head. I just do want to dive in and get developing them. I really want to finish the draft of Scavenger's Tread that I'm on at the moment really quickly because I am getting really, really hungry to jump back into Bring Bardo. And yeah, just when we jump right into the topic, because obviously I've had a forced break due to the move.
Yes.
And yeah, that bit of time away from Scavenger's Tread has made me reassess how I feel about it and what I think of it. I think I've decided to make it a 2-parter because I think I'm almost at a point where I could say that's a full arc and that's a full single story, and then there could be the Scavenger's Tread 2 where I tell the rest of the story. So part of me is thinking of just doing that rather than trying to fit it all in to the one, because there ended up being more characters than I had anticipated, and I think I'd like to develop those characters a little bit more in the space that I've written on at the moment.
Yeah, I don't envy you being in a position where having a second book seems like a very viable option, but the idea of having to drop some stuff from a book, I'm facing that now, and it's very intimidating. I don't think what I'm writing at the moment is going to lend itself to a 2-parter. I think it has to be a single book.
Yeah.
But I've got way too much material. And I've had a long time away from it, and it's made me realize I have too much material, and it's making me need to reassess this stuff. The time away has been very good, but I'll get to that a little bit later. Alex, I have no idea what you're writing at the moment, but do you put things down and then come back to them after a period of time? And if you do, does that help you?
Yes, I do, but I think you have to caveat it really particularly, because depending on what kind of writer you are, I'm a very good picker-upper. I'm not a very good finisher of things. Okay, so I have several, maybe 10 to even 25, 30,000 word manuscripts that are not quite completed. I have quite a few novellae, I guess, like novellas, that are done. But I think it's important to realize why you're putting something down.
Okay.
You have to be really clear about why you're putting it down, because if you go through it once and you've finished it and you've drafted it and you're like, okay, cool, I'm done with this for now. I need to take some space from it, and that's definitely something I do for sure. Mm-hmm. That's one thing, and that's very useful. But I think it's just as easy to put something down when it's not finished, maybe if it's not linearly finished, because you've hit a roadblock or a snag, and my brain personally will find something else to distract it and go, okay, well, I'm just going to put that down for now and go on to this. Then I never come back to the first thing, or I don't for a very long time, because by then I'm consumed by something else. So I think it's really important to know why you're putting it down. And for me, at least, and I wouldn't necessarily say for everyone else, but definitely for me, it's pretty important to get at least to a point where some part of that arc has been locked off and it's complete in some sense, even if it's just the part 1, right? Because then it's at least there's this one component that's fully done, and you can be like, okay, well, that's good. I'm going to come back to that. It's really a death sentence for anything I write to just stop in the middle of it. At least it has been so far. I suppose I could come back and write some of them, but yeah, I felt no inclination to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Is that true to your experience as well, James?
No, but I understand what you mean. That it's kind of like you're building up the steam, and then if you stop, the steam doesn't come back, kind of thing. Whereas if you've got to a certain point, taking that break means you come back and you read it with fresh eyes and can develop it from there. I get that. Yeah,
so it's just like, I don't know, if you're someone who's got a lot of ideas and you're constantly like, okay, I want to jump from this to this to this. If you let that focus wander, there's a really good chance that you just won't have the inspiration to come back to it. And that's certainly the position I found myself in a lot of times.
Okay, so let's say hypothetically, and I want to ask both of you guys, let's say you're writing a piece and you come to this point where maybe you're not enjoying it so much anymore, maybe you feel stuck, you've hit like a big creative block or a roadblock, or you've encountered some structural problems you just don't know how to resolve. Of course, every situation is different, but do you push through and work through it anyway to keep what momentum there is going for fear of losing momentum, like Alex said? Or do you tend to put it away and think, if I have time away from this, my brain's going to sort it out in the background?
I think I would try to push through. And I think I would probably have to run my wheels in the dirt for a little while before I came to the decision to put it down and move away from it. That might be exactly what I needed, but I think I have, in my experience, I have hit that point where I'm like, this isn't working. And then grinded it out for a couple more days, and I figured something out through that process that I needed to do, and been quite happy with the results. I think if I continued to be struggling, I would take time away, and that time away would then make me say, it wasn't just something that needed to be written out, or wasn't just something that needed to click. There's a bigger flaw in this story, and I needed a big step away from that to figure out what that was.
What about you, Alex? What do you think?
Yeah, if something's not working and you're really going over it and you're just going like, this is like in the one that I'm doing now, Faces in the Slag Heap, there's a scene in that I just wrote, and I rewrote it, and it definitely felt better the next time I wrote it, but I'm still not 100% sure that I've nailed it.
Could you tell us what that scene is? I mean, I'm personally curious because I've beta read Faces in the Slag Heap. I
don't really want to say it here, but basically, you know what it is. A character takes a fairly significant decision in one moment, and then the other character sort of finds him in that position.
Yeah, I do know.
And it's not that I don't think it works, and I know I'm being really vague here for obvious reasons, but it's not that I don't think the idea of it works. I just think the execution wasn't as good as it could have been, and I just wanted to redo that again. But I don't know. It's sometimes like I'm trying to think of a good analogy. If you get like I don't know, if you're trying to like get a knot out of do you remember like those school books where you used to put like the plastic like stuff over them, you'd cover your book because, and you know how you get like the bubble in it, and then you'd like try and push the bubble out, but like as you're pushing it out, it kind of gets bigger and it gets
when you should be listing in geography.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like it feels like that. It feels like the bubble just kind of gets bigger and more knotty, and you're like, well, if I keep pushing this, it's just like, it's very clear if something is fundamentally not working, or if it just needs to be workshopped. I don't know why that analogy makes sense to me.
No, it's kind of perfect.
I've used it many times, and it just makes
You say it's quite clear, but to me, I think you guys have a more writing experience than me, frankly, but that never seems clear at all. I often really struggle to diagnose when something is working, when it's not working, why it's not working.
Having said that, I will add the addendum that this is done. It's completed one whole cycle of it. Actually, a couple of cycles through of doing it. So at least I have the perspective to be like, okay, this still doesn't feel right. Is there some way to, does this just need to be sort of ground down, or is it something that actually needs to fundamentally change? And I think it is just the former. I think it just needs to be workshopped a little bit, but having that further out perspective makes that much easier to see, I think, usually.
Does that resonate with you, James?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But also when I say working, I don't mean that that I'm being objective and saying that like the writing is good. When I say something's working, I just mean it's flowing out of me, and I feel when I read back on it, then I'm like, oh, I like that. So that's what I mean. When I get to that point where I'm like, this doesn't read well, I don't know how to proceed. That's what I mean. Like it's not working. That's when I need to kind of like either push through or take a step back if I can't push through it.
Well, half the battle, if not most of the battle, is writing something that you enjoy and that you think is good. Because if you're not going to do that, then that shoots down the whole project anyway. I mean, certainly with me, like to get something to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm proud of this. I want to keep working on this, or I want to put the finishing touches on this, is so important.
Can I ask, Paddy, how far through Oh, I'm sorry. Sovereignty.
Sovereignty.
How far through that are you? Is it
hell of a question. I've got about 70,000 words written, which is a lot.
Yeah,
I'm not even up to the midpoint. This thing has just like it's fractally spiraled out with just way too many story ideas and way too many threads. And there's so many times when I'm thinking like, oh, this is great. This is going to be such a clever metaphor for blah, blah, blah. And there's no time. There's no time in the book. Like I said, it's going to be one. I know it's going to be one. This wouldn't work as a, what do you call a trilogy with 2 books? A duology?
Duology, I believe.
Duology? Okay. Well, yeah, it's not going to be either of those. You know, I got some really good advice from my writing tutor recently. There's someone I think who is a philosopher as well as a thinker on writing. I guess he's a writer as well. And he said if the big event that kicks things off hasn't happened by page 70, and it doesn't really matter how long the book is, if it hasn't happened by page 70, there's a real problem. And when I gave my manuscript to my mentor, she said, like, yeah, I've read up to page 70 and beyond, and you still haven't got to the point that kicks things off. This is too slow. And she's right. So I need to trim a lot and really, really move things forward. So I am actually taking a break while I think about it and restructure it. And already it's helping a lot. And already this time away from writing it is really helping me reassess the project.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I think I'm in a similar place with Scavenger's Tread when I started. Because I was saying I wanted to have the first half written and then send out the beta readers. When I started putting the finished sections into a large document, I was just looking at the word count going up, and I was like, "Oh, I'm at 10,000 words already." And I was like, "Oh, that's 15,000 words. That should be a quarter." And I'm not a quarter. I'm not an 8 of the way through. And I was like, "Oh, this is gonna be." I think the word count is gonna be far more expansive than I thought it would be.
Do you know what the milestones you need to hit in the story are, or are you just writing it and feeling it out?
Yeah, so the overall story was broken up into this happens here, this happens here, this happens here. But now I'm looking at it and I'm like, this could potentially, for me to reach the midpoint, I think I'm going to be 60, 70,000 words. And you can't do that because then the other half of the story needs to hit milestones and be almost just as long. I could have second half of Act 2 could be 10,000 words and the last act could be another 10,000 words. And then I'm like, hey, it's a 90,000 word novel. But it would just come to a very sudden, very unsatisfying ending.
Yes.
Yeah, you don't do that. So I was just taking a step back, being like, what can I trim? And I was kind of reading and looking through it again. And I was saying, you know what, there's an awful lot of the beats happen in different places if I decided to structure it this way. So I'm going to see if I can turn it into part 1 and then turn it into part 2.
So Alex, do you I mean, I've never heard you say that you've got a problem with overwriting or writing too much.
No, I find the opposite actually. It boggles my mind hearing you guys saying like, oh, I just can't fit it all in, because I'm always like, oh, I need to get more words. Like, where are you finding these words?
That sounds like a great problem to have.
I mean, it
really does.
Yeah, I mean,
go back through a story and say, where can I just add in a little bit more character, add in a little bit more.
I suppose so.
That sounds great.
My story's too punchy and it's too trim and flowing too well.
No,
what am I going to do to bloat it out?
It can be a little sparse, is what I'm saying. The way that I write can be a little bit sparse, and this is something that I'm really grateful for my girlfriend, because she's kind of my first reader, and she'll be like, "Oh, this is really good," but like it's so rushed, it's so sparse. Like there's no, she doesn't even say it's rushed. It's just like it's sparse. Like there's no descriptions of anything. You don't you just go from point A to point B, and I think that's because I have an inherent fear of losing the audience. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm just terrified. There's like there are so many other things that people can be doing with their time. Like, you know, there's Netflix, there's video games, there's, I don't know, trading stocks, like whatever. There's a million things you can be doing on the internet, like porn, like anything, you know, to be able to engage someone yeah, I think you have to really take that attention seriously and move things along. And I probably tend to lean too far into that and probably strip things out that shouldn't necessarily be taken out. But I really like to get to the end as well. It's because I struggle with that. I think maybe it's my own attention I'm battling with as well, because it's like I need to be able to get to the end of this in pretty much one go. So if I don't keep a pretty solid clip, it might not happen, you know? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah,
it makes sense. They sound like strong instincts to have. Like they sound like they'll really stand to you.
Yeah.
I hope so.
You can always go back in the second draft then and figure out, I can add a little description here, I can add a little emotion here.
Yeah.
Once you get the knack of knowing where you can slow down, I guess, a bit, or where you can add that stuff in. Like I think that first draft, if you're the dual instincts of trying to keep engagement and trying to reach the end quickly, it means you're gonna write something real tight really quickly, and then I
think there are worse problems to have. I definitely think that. But what was I going to say? Oh, I had a really trenchant, insightful thing to say, and I lost it. No, I don't know. Whatever. It was probably nothing.
It might come back to you. And thinking about your work, Alex, I don't think I've ever once thought, this is dragging. This is not getting to the point. This probably doesn't need to be here. It's quick and punchy. But having said that, speaking of my mentor again, because I've got like multiple sessions with her, so I get to speak with her for a long time, which is great because she knows a lot about structure. In her opinion, it's easier to overwrite, which I have a tendency to do anyway, great, and then pull things out. Because once you've got the whole thing, you can get that 10,000 foot view, and it's easier to point at the things that aren't working and need to go to form the connections that need to be there.
Yeah.
Rather than you get a 10,000 foot view on something that's barely there and you can't really see much.
That's right. And then what do you add in? How do you know what to add in? Like, because it's just a skeleton. It's just a little draft, and you're like, well, what even? And then you need to really think about what you are actually trying to do, aside from just getting from point A to point B to point C. So I think, like paradoxically, maybe overwriting. Actually, if you can just do it and you can get through the whole process, it might actually be easier in the redraft. I think maybe the second draft underwriting is a little bit trickier. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, or in theory anyway. I'm yet to encounter it, but it makes sense. So recently I was looking through old files on my computer from years, I'm talking years and years ago, Alex, way before like I joined the writing group or what have you. It was this old science fiction series that I was writing. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have any writing theory behind me, and I didn't really have a structure. I was just writing. And at the time I stopped because I thought this isn't very good. I came back to it and I actually really like it. Even though the writing is really amateurish in parts, there's some great ideas. I think the story's kind of engaging. That was probably a decade of rest.
That's a break.
That project.
That's a big break.
Have you guys ever come back after a really, really long time to old stuff that you put away? Maybe you forgot about it. Maybe you thought it wasn't very good and reassessed it. Or I guess the other way around. Something that you thought was good, you've taken a break, and now you think, maybe not.
I'll jump on that just because from moving back, I have all these notes that I've been traveling with and carrying around with me for actually quite a few years. That
you mean physical?
I started reading back.
Physical paper
Yeah,
notes.
I think probably about 13 kilograms of weight to my suitcase was just notes. I'm talking, I don't have any within grasp.
You own an iPad.
Little notepads and then large notepads, and then just pages and pages of notes on characters and stuff, which I keep meaning to transcribe and then being like, I'll get to that later when I have time, and then not doing it. So on the flight, I was typing this out, trying to just like typing out 3 or 4 pages and then just tearing the pages out and folding them up and putting them in the back of the airplane seat. So like, I hope no one ever sees that. But like you said, I was coming across 2 different things. I was coming across stuff that either was like a really cool, really interesting idea that I obviously never developed, but I had just set up in a notepad. but that wasn't very well written. But I was like, that's a really interesting idea. I'd love to know where I thought I was going with that at the time, because now with really rereading it, it's sparking off all these ideas and other stuff that were from kind of more long form projects that I had abandoned because that wasn't very interesting. And then I was reading back on it and I was like, this is a really interesting kind of an espionage, kind of post-apocalyptic espionage type thing where a character is sort of caught in between these two communities, because he doesn't belong to either communities, but he's working kind of as a scavenger, getting materials for both of them. And he starts to put together that one of these communities is planning to invade and go to war with the other community. And he's in there under like a false identity and all this. And I was like, there's actually layers and layers and layers of stuff in each of these scenes that I had set up in previous stuff. And I was like, this is like, I didn't realize I'd written this. This is quite engaging. I'd love to see if I could pick this up in some manner, find a place to jump back into this. But yeah, 100%. You kind of look back on stuff that you're like, oh, that's not a very good story. And you come back and you're kind of like, actually, there was something there that could be developed.
This reminds me of all of us being totally horrified that Matan would delete material that he didn't need or didn't think was very good. And everyone just collective, oh, what? No, huh?
I've since talked him off that ledge, actually. He said,
glad.
I promise, Alex, I won't delete things anymore. I was like, good.
Yeah. I mean, we're all harsh on our own work, but I think he might be particularly so. And his work is good, and him deleting it for that reason, that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable.
It's just, I don't know. I think most writers, probably myself included, like, don't have a very realistic relationship to their work. I think because, like, certainly I know, okay, so one of my biases is the further along I read in a piece that I've written, the less I like it. Like, that just happens. And that's not, that goes for writing, that goes for reading it back. Sometimes it's really well constructed, especially with a short story. I'll just be like, oh yeah, no, I like that. That was well done. But I struggle to think of a long form piece that I've written where I don't start to get like, what are you doing? Like, you know, it just feels a little, what's the word? Contrived, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But like looking back at old work from a long time ago, there's definitely some things that I've read. I only started writing in earnest when I was about 27, which is 6 years ago now, which is crazy. And the thing that we put out in the new Mythic that we just released, that was actually the first thing I ever wrote when I started rewriting again, because I wrote a little bit as a teenager.
I remember you saying that. So you would have come back to that after a long time and thought, hey, this is actually pretty good.
I was like, yeah, I like this. I'm a big fan of like pretty simple concepts that are just executed, you know, very well or very like humanely, you know, with a lot of focus on characters and interactions and things. So yeah, most of the stuff that I come back to, I like. There's always some clunkers. There's this terrible thing I wrote about, like, it's like a space trucker on a space station in a space brothel, and it was just awful. It's just really bad. But you know, and that was like the first novella thing that I sort of wrote. But I don't know. Generally, I think it's pretty like, yeah, this is fun. You know.
There's probably something a little concerning if you read everything that you wrote like a decade ago and think, oh, this is all gold. That's probably a red flag. Like if you're not seeing some trash amongst the treasure, then maybe you don't have the clearest view of your own work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're always trying to eliminate our biases, I guess.
Yeah, as much as we can. Although, like you said, I mean, at least and I think most people don't have a very good view of our own work. This is what beta read is for. Once again. So I have a specific story about a real problem I had in my novel and how taking time away, the idea just kind of came to me miraculously. So look at this story about basically he's someone with a survivalist mentality. He thinks that civilization, or at least his society, is teetering on the brink of collapse, and that he needs to take action now to turn his suburban house into a highly defensible fortress to survive the oncoming tide. And I really want to, I mean, this is part of why like my shit bloats out to way too big in size. I want some metaphors in there and so like the country he's from has this like rich warrior history, and I want him to see himself as a continuation of these like stoic warriors who used to defend their hill forts against invaders and really stubbornly control what their ancestor had fought for so hard. And I want to open the book with like a throwback to that. So I had this dream sequence. He's dreaming of himself as this Iron Age king defending his castle. Yeah, I mean, if you're listening to this and you think like, why would you open a book with a dream sequence? That's a really bad idea. Yeah, it is. And everyone in Precipice Fiction told me that. Like, yes, it doesn't work. Don't even try. And I tried reworking it, like, but if I do this, it'll work. No, it doesn't.
What was Ali saying about, like, I think it was Ali or someone, maybe I think maybe you, James, or Ali. Someone was saying,
James
like,
gave me some really good advice on it, but
yeah, they were saying dream sequences are shorthand for this doesn't matter. Like,
might have been, I think Ali might have summed that up, but I think I definitely expressed the same thing, because once you realize it's a dream, you're like, this will end in a minute, and then we'll get back into the story. Yeah,
and there's no.
I think you can.
There's no stakes. Exactly.
There's no stakes because what happens in a dream doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think I've since we had that big. I know we had one episode where we always went into a big, probably a dog pile onto dreams and flashbacks and stuff. I have read stuff because I know the Town Hall series does a few dreams sections in that.
What's the Town Hall series?
Not Town Hall, Wolf Hall.
Wolf Hall.
Sorry.
There is some dreams, and I think they work actually.
Because I think they're often quite brief, and they're giving you a look into kind of what's important to the character, what he's thinking about, or how he's feeling.
And they're always they're placed between two other scenes and flow between them. They're a way of connecting two scenes rather than dropping out of a scene then dropping back into the story. It feels relevant. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, I think we've all tried to make dreams work in long form stories, because like you said, Paddy, it's kind of like a way to analyze the character's psyche in a way that the character might not understand, but that the reader might see true what the character's understanding of themselves are. But it's often not as interesting as we think it is when we're trying to make it work.
Well, it's a very bold move to start with a dream sequence. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I wouldn't say it's a like definitively bad idea. I just think you'd have to do it in a fairly specific way.
I think it's one of those things that it's a bit overdone, and that's why it's considered to not be a great way to start a story. Same with having a story start with the character waking up and going about their typical morning routine, which is
that's my second scene right off the back of that.
Already, okay.
Yes.
Yes. I think that scene, the way that they say to make that scene work is to have something be going wrong in the character. But then it can also work, because I know American Psycho, I think, starts literally just with his morning routine, but I think that it's satirical, and I think that yours might work in the same way, because he's you're explaining his psyche, but then it's also kind of funny at the same time that this is what he does. Yeah, and I do think as well, as I remember reading that, and you're reading it to try to figure out what is he doing, like what's going on. So I do think that works.
I remember reading, Paddy, the first part of that I ever read, which I thought was brilliant, was the actually the first thing I think was with the lawnmower party, and that was really funny as well. But the thing that I think you introduced to me, like this is the beginning of it, was when he's driving to work and he's like talking with the other guys, and that was really engaging. Like I was like, this is the perfect way to start this novel. That made sense to me because it grounded in everything. It told you what his affiliations were from what he was listening to on the radio. It told you his status based on where he's working and the people he was hanging out with. And it just gave a lot of flavor to it. So I was like, oh, this is just the beginning of the novel, right? Like that's what I always figured.
And it's funny, I have, because I've had time away now, I have considered making that the start of the novel instead. There's 1,000 different ways you can recombine a novel, 1,000 different things you can do with it, which is almost paralyzing sometimes because you're looking at all the different possibilities. And it's like, there's a million things I can do with my story, and 800,000 of them are going to be bad. Anyway, my point was regarding the opening dream sequence. Taking time away, I was thinking about a completely different problem and a completely different scene in a completely different movie, and thinking about what I liked about that scene. This is months after the fact that I finished it, and I'm jogging at the time, and I realized while jogging, like oh, what they've done in this other film is exactly what I should do in the beginning of my book. I won't go into details about what it is, but the point was I was doing something completely unrelated and thinking about different work. And a connection was made in my mind between that different work, which really is very, very different, not at all similar to mine, and my work itself. So do you guys, I don't know if you can think of any specific times where, let's say you're watching something or you're playing a game or you're reading something, or maybe you're doing something that isn't writing based at all, and it's given you a sudden idea or insight into how to solve a writing problem or see your own writing differently or an idea for a scene.
Yeah. I don't think I've ever like sat down and been like, this is a problem. How do I fix this? And then thought of how to fix it. That's never happened. But yeah, 100%. I find, definitely people talk about it in the shower. That doesn't happen so much to me, but yeah, definitely jogging or doing any sort of movement or on the bus, like just traveling seems to be, but for sure. And you're just wondering, you're like, that's the thing. That's the missing jigsaw piece that I can use to put this together. Which came to me for Dawn House. There was like a thing that didn't make sense at the end of it. And I was like, how can I like bring this together? And then, I don't know, I think I was in the car one day or like going on holidays or on a train or something. And it just popped into my head and I was like, that's it. That's the missing number.
Yeah. Often me saying buses, cars, anything where you're standing and things are moving around you.
For me, it's lying in bed, not able to sleep. Yeah. I find if I need to like focus my thoughts, so I just start thinking about the novel I'm working on or the story I'm working on. I think about that for a bit. That's what helps me fall asleep. But often in that time, it will click. They'll be like, oh, I need to differentiate these characters, or I need to do something like this, and it'll start to make things come together. So when I wake up in the morning, I have kind of a clearer idea of what I need to do. And definitely in Scavenger's Thread, I think I probably had 4 characters that were a little bit similar. In the first, when I was beginning the story, I'd separated them in terms of how their goals conflicted with one another, but each of them they could have been boiled down to being like the same kind of character. So over time, I started to develop them in different ways, but I still felt like I wasn't working. And one day I said, you know what, this character needs to be really likable and really charismatic and really just the opposite of the other kind of, the characters are kind of aloof and they kind of don't speak a lot and stuff. And I was like, this character actually needs to be a salesman. He needs to be the guy who can come in and start a conversation, be very optimistic and positive and a totally different kind of personality. And then sitting down and like trying to write that character really wasn't working. And it was from watching TV and kind of seeing when other characters come in, and because I wasn't coming up with charismatic, I wasn't coming up with salesman. I was just thinking he needed to be able to do those things. But it was watching TV and seeing characters who come in and they've got a big winning smile and they've got this and that I was like, that's what I need. That's the kind of the vibe that character should give off.
Yeah. It's like the way when you're reading something, it's often such a good way to reflect on your own work, because when you're reading a good book, you can see sort of how it should be done, but also a constant stream of ideas that you can sit and ruminate with more than you can with, TV shows and movies as well. But I feel like with a book, as you're reading it, you can stop on a given moment and think about, why did they do that? What have they done there? Like, why is it that works well? And for me, at least, that's so beneficial to inform my own writing. So, James, you touched on coming back to one of your many disparate sheets of recorded
my
ideas.
hastily written fever dream notes in the notepad,
and not fully remembering what it is what the central idea was.
No idea. Well, actually, I know I originally read it and thought it was a short story, and I was like, what was this? This seems really interesting. And then I went on like 20 pages out of the notepad and there was other stuff, and it was the same idea continued. And it was actually part of a long form story. And I know that something very specific was going on. These 2 characters are basically in a sort of like a wasteland, a desert. They come across what is essentially a zombie tethered to a post beside a tent. And there's a man sitting outside the tent taking notes, because the zombie can speak and this guy is completely lost his mind. And the characters immediately are just kind of horrified, not at the scene and not that it's not like broken the golden rule, by speaking with the dead, because they say, like, in this world, you just never do that, because all they'll do is tell lies and drive you mad.
I like
so
that. Damn,
the characters
really
are sort
good.
of debating. Yeah, right. It's engaging right away. So the characters are discussing this, but they can't imagine why he would have done this or what the story was behind this. And I remembered that there's something very, very specific going on. This is part of a larger problem that's going on in the world, but the characters' beliefs and the characters' information at the time are preventing them from recognizing what this is. And I knew during the course of the story that one of the characters needed to figure this out in order to deal with the problem. But there's something specific happening in that moment. So I was looking at this and I was like, this is engaging. Can I make a short story out of this? Or does this idea need to exist only within the larger context of that other story, which I'm not going to write? So it's like, I don't know what to do with this story now.
It sounds like it's still a coherent scene though. Alex, have you ever come across your old material and thought, I don't know what I'm talking about? Or you've written a note to yourself and you've come back and gone, God damn, I really wish I detailed this more because this is gibberish.
Oh, yeah. There's notes. Sometimes you'll come across a note and be like, I don't know what that means. Like, I'm not sure what I was trying to do there. But these days, let me see. I can't even, it's like, yeah. So I guess the first couple of things I would have done would have been like, 6 years ago was like when I started writing. But I actually looked at it. I was telling you guys this. I looked at a submission log that I did, and I hadn't submitted any stories for like literally 2 years, like basically over COVID. I just hadn't submitted any, which kind of sounds insane because what else was I doing? But yeah, you come back to some of those stories and you're just instantly like, oh, that's the problem. You know, like this is too short. Like there's nothing going on in this little bit here. But yeah, I mean, mostly they're pretty coherent. Because I have a lot of folders of things that are like unfinished or finished or partially finished. So I know the state they're going to be in. Usually I'm afraid to read the ones that I'm like, I was like, I remember that not being very good. So I don't think I even made it through the space proper one, like more than a couple thousand words. Because there was just this big gap where it was like, oh, those two things don't mesh together. I'd clearly just been like, I don't know how I'm going to connect these two bits, so I'll just leave that bit out.
You should push through one day. There might be some gold toward the end,
Maybe I should. I should definitely read it. I'm sure it can't be that bad.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's definitely work I've had where I've started this story and it seems pretty cool, but I have no idea what my idea for it was originally. So I've left stories too long before coming back to them. I have no idea what the hell the speaking goat was about. Like, it seemed cool that they found this talking goat who lived in a hut in the forest, but I have no idea what I was doing with it.
It's very The Witch.
I don't know, was it? And
I don't know. It reminds me of what's his name? Black
Phillip?
Yeah, the goat in The Witch.
Black Phillip.
Black Phillip, yeah.
Do you like butter?
It doesn't feel like the taste of butter.
James, I know you didn't like that film, but no.
I do love that film. Both of them.
Yeah.
So funny. They're really funny, some bits of them.
Surprisingly so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this has been interesting, and we've seen everyone's different views on the value of leaving things, whether it's always a good idea, whether you can leave things too long, and some of the ways in which you can approach things differently after leaving it. So yeah, I think we've covered all bases. Alex, do you want to close us out with a quote?
Sure. Yes. There is virtue in work and there is virtue in rest. Use both and overlook neither. It's by Alan Cohen.
Very wise, Alan Cohen. Very wise.
Oh yeah.
Well, this has been fun. And as always, if you've enjoyed this podcast and got something out of it, rate, review, leave us a comment. Leave us a positive review. Leave us 5 stars. You don't have to, but we'd really appreciate it. And if you want to get in touch, you can reach us via the comments on our YouTube. You can email us. I think there might even be a form on our website. We will respond because we love talking about this stuff. It's what we'd be doing anyway. And
that's it,
I guess. But once again, this has been Prose Cons, the Precipice Fiction Podcast, and we will see you next week for more writing wisdom. Take care.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, a Precipice fiction podcast.